Hey guys, a couple of things I'm going to share with you today. Just some quick tips in regards to fonts and when you're working with fonts, and just to show you a couple of things that you can do with fonts. So I am inside Cricut Design Space. I have a blank canvas in front of me, and I'm going to go on the left-hand side and click on text. And I'm just going to type in a name. All right, so the first thing I'm going to share with you is that anytime you're working with fonts, you want to make all changes to the font. Whatever you need to do to the font, you want to do it before you ever come over and ungroup. So ungroup is here on the right-hand side. So here you have your ungroup. Once you ungroup, you have no more control over utilizing the fonts to change what type of font you're working with. So if I were to, I'm going to put Candoris on here. I'm going to duplicate that just so you can see the difference here. So you can see when I click on Candoris, it gives me access to the fonts where I can go in and change the font to whatever I like. Okay. However, if I click on this Candoris and I go and I ungroup it, and let's say for whatever reasons, I decide that I want to kind of move the letters down like this, alternate every other letter. Not like that, but like this. Okay, so I'm trying to be fancy. So I got letters going up and down. Okay, so once I do that, and then I go back and I say, okay, I'm finished. Now I'm going to group it back. And I group them back. And then I'm like, you know what? I don't really like that font. I'm going to change it. Notice when you look over here now on the left-hand side, there is no ability to change your font. So you always want to do whatever you're going to do to your font before you start moving letters around, okay? So I'm going to duplicate this again. And one of the things I shared with you in the previous video on yesterday was there is more than one way to do certain functions within Cricut Design Space. So you can also go and you can change the letter spacing, okay, which is pretty much like ungrouping, okay? You're shifting your letters, okay? So if I go here to letter space and I have this Candoris highlighted and I go to letter space, and if I click on the down arrow, it's going to shift my letters to the left. If I click on the up arrow, it's going to shift my letters to the right. So I'm going to move my letters to the left. Okay. So I move the letters and I'm like, okay, that looks good. I like that. So with this one, you still have the ability to change your font. However, you don't have the ability to shift these letters down. So ungroup will allow you to ungroup the letters and move each individual letter wherever you want it to. Okay, so like if I go here and I ungroup, and let's say I want to move the S over the A for some crazy reason, and then I go back and I regroup them, or not that part, but I go back and I group them together. Okay. This one will not allow me to do that with letter space. It's only going to allow me to change the spacing of the letters, okay? However, now if I say, you know what, even though they're closer, I want to ungroup that and change it to something else. I still want to do this, but this time I'm going to put it like this. Okay, for whatever reason, you want to do it like this. Now notice this is the one that I changed the line spacing on. All right, so I have Candoris and I have it going some crazy way here. And so now when I go back and I highlight these letters to group them back together, Again, when you look at the left-hand side of your screen, you no longer have access to the fonts. So if I wanted to do this seriously and I wanted to use a different font, I would have to go and change the font first. Then I could change the letter spacing if I want to, or just go right to ungroup and do whatever I need to do. So I just wanted to point that out to you to help you understand that when you're utilizing the fonts, there's some functionality that you lose when you change certain things, okay? So that's number one in reference to grouping and ungrouping. So we're going to take this out because we don't need that any longer. So the next thing I'm going to show you is that also when you're working with your fonts, when I click on fonts, there's some information over here to the right. So this green all indicates that all fonts that I have within Cricut Design Space, be it Cricut's fonts or fonts that I've uploaded to my computer, all of them are here in Cricut Design Space, okay? Excuse me. However, if I only want to see the fonts or use the fonts that I have uploaded to Cricut Design Space that are not Cricut fonts, then I would click on System. And these are the fonts that I have uploaded to Cricut Design Space, okay? If you want to see only the fonts that belong to Cricut, Cricut's fonts, then you could click on Cricut. And these are only the fonts that Cricut have within Cricut Design Space. It has none of your fonts that you've uploaded to Cricut Design Space. So like, for example, Alex Brush is one of the ones that I think I brought over from DeFont. And when you look out here, if I was looking for Alex Brush, excuse me, you can see it doesn't exist, okay? And that's because it is not a Cricut font. However, if I click on System, and now I go and look, there is Alex Brush. So you can, to keep from having to scroll through all of the fonts in the system, when you know that you're looking for one that you've uploaded to Cricut Design Space, then it's better to come out and just click on System, okay? And then in addition to searching for fonts, like if you know the font name, then you can type in the font name to make it easier for you. And that wasn't what I was trying to do. All right, so there's autumn and November. So if I was trying to find autumn and November, you can type the font name directly into the search field if you know it, and it'll bring up those options based on what you put in the search field. In addition to that, over to the right-hand side, you have a filter. And this filter will also narrow your search results for fonts. So you can say My Fonts, which is going to act just like your system font. So if I go here and I click on All, and then I go to Filter, and I say My Fonts, notice it's going to highlight the green system. Okay, so for some crazy reason it didn't do it that time, but let me make sure I clicked on it. Okay, so there's your fonts that you've actually uploaded into Design Space. So I don't know why it didn't highlight the green this time, but you know, stranger things have happened. In addition to your filters for My Fonts, you can also look at multi-layer. Now, just to tell you about multi-layer is normally going to be a thicker font that you can work with. So as I scroll through here, I see fonts that are made up of multiple layers, okay? And right next to the font title, it's going to tell you what that font is used for. This one is writing, this one is cutting, this one is writing, this one is cutting. If you know you're only looking for a writing font, then you have the ability to select writing, and it'll give you all of the fonts that are out here for writing. So sometimes what happens, I'm going to select this teardrop. Sometimes what will happen is you will be utilizing a font that is a draw font and not a cut font, and you want to understand why is the font so thin. Like, I'm not going to be able to cut this out and weave it, you know, without ripping the vinyl. Well, that's because it's a draw font. It's not a cut font. However, you can go up to style and you can change it. So if you change that, let's say I want to go bold italic. Notice now it's no longer a draw file. It is now a cut file. Okay, so you can change it so that it'll thicken up the font for you and allow you to be able to use it as a cut file instead of a draw file. Okay, but sometimes you do have some draw fonts out here that won't work that way, but you can always come out here and look to see if bold or bold italic is available to you. And by the way, I like this teardrop font. I've never used it, but I think I will now. But yeah, so always pay attention to what type of font it is. And then when we go back to the multi-layer, so I'm going to go back to fonts, and I'm just going to duplicate this because I like this font. And I didn't ask it to do that. I really didn't, Cricut. Okay, so I'm just going to duplicate this. All right, and now I'm going to go back to my fonts, and I'm going to go back to multi-layer for a second here. So I'm going to select filter, multi-layer. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on filter. I'm going to say clear filters because this is telling you it's giving me my fonts multi-layer writing. We're going to clear that. And we're going to go back and we're going to select filter and we're going to select multi-layer by itself. So let's say I select one of these other fonts out here, and I'm going to make sure I click on one that does not cost me. So I'm going to go with Anna's favorite, Anna's fancy lettering. Let's see what that looks like. All right, so here we have Anna's fancy lettering. It tells you right off the bat this is a cut file. So when you load this into your machine, it's going to cut it out for you, which is all fine and dandy. You can sometimes go back up to your style and see if you can change it, okay? So you can say, oh, I want this to write instead of cut. And that's the way it is going to actually draw that particular font onto whatever material you place into your cutting machine, because you've now changed it from a cut file to a draw file, okay, by changing it to writing. So when you come up and you play around with the style, not only is it going to change the look of your font, it might also change the functionality of your font from a cut to a draw or writing in this case, okay? So I want to put that out there. The last thing I'm going to tell you, because I don't want to make this video super, super long, in reference to your font, is that when you are moving your fonts closer to one another, so when we're changing that letter spacing to move the font over some to get rid of some of the excess space, okay, so Cricut is thinking. I want to show you something here that most people don't know. And that is when you get super, super close like this, and you can see the N and the D is touching, the A and the N is touching, the R and the I is touching, you confuse Cricut Design Space. It doesn't know where the cut lines are because the letters are touching. And so sometimes you'll have where you're working with a thin font and not realize that it is a draw or writing font, and you've moved those letters over and you put it into you put your vinyl into the cutting machine and the vinyl eats it up because it's not cutting right. It's not cutting right because it doesn't know where the cut lines are. Okay, so you have to make sure that you do allow enough space in there so that Cricut understands that this is a C, this is an A, this is an N, because otherwise it's going to look like it's trying to cut this A and N together and a little bit of the D. And so you're going to have some that's going to come out right and some that is just going to rip it up. Like Cricut gets confused and it's like, you know what, just tear it up. And that's what it does. It just rips your vinyl all to pieces. Okay. So you want to make sure that you are leaving spacing in there unless you're working with welding and you have a cursive or a script font that you're working with and you do want it to touch. That's one thing. But when you're not working with welding and you just want to shift the letters over a little bit to remove some of the space, just make sure you don't shift too far. And if you can't really tell if you shifted too far, In the bottom left hand corner down here, you do have the ability to increase your size so that you can see it better. And so once you increase that size by clicking on that plus sign, you can clearly tell that those letters are touching. So just in case it's really small and it doesn't look like it's touching, even here with the little knobs on the D and the O, you can see that they are touching one another. And so sometimes Cricut will cut out a D and this O together and then this R by itself. And you're wondering, why is it cutting out, some together or just ripping it up right in here? It's because it doesn't know what you're trying to do based on how you change the spacing of the lettering or the font. All right. So I just wanted to put that out there, guys, to kind of help you with when you're working with the fonts within Cricut Design Space. I'll continue to add little videos here and there on functionality within Cricut Design Space because my ultimate goal is so that you'll be well versed on how to use Cricut Design Space to do whatever you like, create whatever project you like, and know what's doable, what's not doable, and when something is acting crazy, why it's acting that way. Okay? All right, guys, I want to thank you so much for your time and thank you all so much for being a part of my group. As always, my motto is each one reach one so that each one can teach one. You guys have a great day.